At 2:32 p.m. on July 9, 2024, Carol Hunt opened her front door to Kyle Clifford, her daughter Louise's ex-boyfriend. He was holding a bag of Louise's things and a card for the family. To Carol, it was an ordinary, polite goodbye. She let him in. She had no idea Clifford had spent the last 11 days planning a massacre. Hidden in his bag and car were a 10-inch butcher's knife, a compound crossbow, rope, duct tape, and petrol. Within minutes, Carol was dead. But Clifford didn't flee. He locked the doors and waited 4 hours for her daughters, Louise and Hannah, to come home. By nightfall, 3 women were dead, launching a nationwide manhunt that exposed a digital paper trail of extreme premeditation, and forced the UK to rewrite its weapon laws forever. If you appreciate deeply researched, respectful true crime documentaries that focus on honoring the victims rather than glorifying the perpetrator, please take a second to hit that subscribe button. Leaving a like and sharing your thoughts in the comments helps our independent channel reach more viewers who care about factual, fluff-free coverage. Thank you for your support. This wasn't a sudden break. Hours after Louise ended their relationship, Clifford began an 11-day countdown, tracking family schedules, test-firing his crossbow, and consuming radical misogynistic content online. This is the story of the Hunt family, and the evidence that brought their killer to justice. To understand the scale of what was lost on the 9th of July, 2024, you have to step away from the crime scene tape and the sensationalized headlines that followed. You have to look back at the quiet household on Ashland Close in Bushey, a leafy, peaceful town nestled in Hertfordshire just northwest of London. For decades, the Hunt family lived the kind of life neighbors described with remarkable consistency: gentle, private, close-knit, and completely unbothered by the noise of the outside world. They were not a family that sought the spotlight, even though one of its members lived in it. At the heart of that home was Carol Hunt. Born in the early 1960s, Carol was a woman who lived her life entirely outside public view. She left behind no public digital footprint, no grand press archives, and no public record of her early career, simply because she never needed one. What she did build was a foundation of human connections that lasted decades. Her core circle of childhood friends, Leah Olay, Dion Smith, and Abigail Phillips, remained her closest confidants into their late 50s and early 60s. To those who knew her best, Carol was the quiet backbone of every room she entered, a warm, steadying presence who measured the value of her life by the happiness of the people under her roof. It was Carol who, decades earlier, changed the trajectory of her husband John's career. Long before John Hunt became one of the most recognizable voices in British sports broadcasting, he was working as a Metropolitan Police officer in Kilburn, North London. It was Carol who spotted an advertisement in a local Harrow newspaper calling for a trainee horse racing broadcaster for Ladbrokes. She recognized his talent before he did, pushing him to take a leap of faith that most people talk themselves out of. John took her advice, transitioning from greyhound commentary to horse racing, eventually becoming a staple on BBC Radio 5 Live and Sky Sports Racing. Colleagues who worked alongside John for over 20 years recalled that even at the height of his broadcasting career, his identity as a devoted husband and father was what defined him. Long before any tragedy made his name famous, he proudly showed off photos of his girls at holiday work gatherings. Together, Carol and John built a life centered around their 3 daughters, Amy, born in 1993, Hannah, born in 1996, and Louise, born in 1999. As the girls grew into adulthood, the family home didn't become a place they simply visited on holidays, it remained the anchor of their lives. The daughters did not scatter across the country, they stayed close, building careers rooted in their local community. Louise, the youngest at 25, was upbeat, hardworking, and possessed a natural warmth that drew people in. She channeled her love for animals into launching her own dog grooming business, operating out of a dedicated outbuilding right on the family property. Local clients brought their dogs to her door daily, knowing her as a bright, smiling presence who took immense pride in her independence. Hannah, 28, trained as a skin and beauty therapist. Known among her clients as exceptional at her trade and effortlessly easy to love, she shared that same grounded work ethic. Amy, the eldest, remained an unwavering pillar for both her parents and her sisters. The family's rhythm was ordinary in the best possible way: family meals, weekend pub lunches, holidays to Italy, and trips to Disneyland. A short time before the tragedy, Amy would later recall an evening when the three sisters sat together and talked about how extraordinarily lucky they felt to have grown up in their household, supported, secure, and loved. Hannah had walked straight into the house afterward to tell her mother directly how grateful they all were for the life Carol and John had given them. That was the world Kyle Clifford stepped into around late 2022. Clifford, then in his mid-20s, was a former soldier who had served brief time in the British Army, much of it spent away from active duty citing illness, before leaving the military unemployed. When Louise began dating him, the Hunt family welcomed him with open arms. He was invited into the intimate rhythms of their lives: Sunday roasts, birthday gatherings, and eventually a full family Christmas spanning several days filled with food, board games, and laughter. To John Hunt, sitting across the dinner table, Clifford looked like any other ordinary young man trying to find his footing. But underneath the pleasant exterior, something darker was taking root. As the months passed, Louise began noticing troubling patterns. Clifford displayed a sharp, underlying arrogance, sudden flashes of anger, and made comments that revealed a bitter, belittling worldview. Watching from the sidelines, Carol picked up on his immaturity and controlling tendencies. But Carol practiced a quiet, respectful style of parenting. She didn't dictate to her adult daughter. She trusted Louise to navigate her own relationship and make her own choices. By June 2024, Louise had seen enough. On June 26, she ended the relationship. She did it maturely, clearly, and without malice, simply recognizing that the relationship was no longer healthy. Clifford initially pretended to accept the decision, but his pride had been wounded in a way that his rigid mindset couldn't process. To a man consumed by an entitlement to control, Louise's independence was not just a personal choice, it was an insult. What the Hunt family viewed as a clean, peaceful breakup, Clifford viewed as a declaration of war. Within hours of being turned away, his heartbreak curdled into calculated malice. Unbeknownst to anyone on Ashland Close, the quiet young man who had sat at their Christmas table just 6 months earlier opened a web browser on his phone and began an 11-day countdown. The warm, secure world Carol Hunt had spent 40 years building was about to cross paths with a predator who had already decided that if he couldn't control Louise's life, he would destroy everything she loved. At 2:32 p.m. on July 9, 2024, Carol Hunt walked to her front door in Bushey, Hertfordshire, to greet a young man she had welcomed into her home for 18 months. Kyle Clifford, her daughter Louise's ex-boyfriend, was holding a bag of Louise's belongings and a card for the family. To Carol, it was an ordinary, polite goodbye. She let him inside. She had no idea Clifford had spent the last 11 days planning a massacre. Concealed in his backpack and car were a 10-inch butcher's knife, a compound crossbow, duct tape, and petrol. Within minutes, Carol was dead. But Clifford didn't flee. He locked the front door, retrieved his weapons, and waited 4 hours in the quiet house to ambush her daughters, Louise and Hannah. By nightfall, 3 members of one family were dead. The ensuing investigation exposed a digital paper trail of extreme premeditation, and forced the UK government to rethink its weapon laws forever. If you value deeply researched, respectful true crime documentaries that focus on honoring the victims rather than glorifying the perpetrator, please take a second to hit that subscribe button. Leaving a like and sharing your thoughts in the comments helps our independent channel reach more viewers who care about factual, fluff-free coverage. 1. When investigators pulled apart Kyle Clifford's digital footprint, they found this was no sudden loss of control. Starting hours after Louise ended their relationship, Clifford executed an 11-day countdown, tracking family schedules, test-firing his crossbow into a tree, and searching radical misogynistic content online. This is the story of the Hunt family, and the forensic trail that brought their killer to justice. To understand what was lost on Ashland Close, you have to step away from the crime scene tape and look at the household Carol Hunt spent 40 years building. Carol was a woman who lived her life outside the public eye, devoted entirely to her close circle of friends and her family. Decades earlier, it was Carol who spotted an ad in a Harrow newspaper for a trainee racing commentator, encouraging her husband, John Hunt, to take a leap of faith. John went on to become one of the most recognizable voices on BBC Radio 5 Live and Sky Sports Racing. Yet colleagues noted that no matter how big his broadcasting career grew, John's primary identity was always husband to Carol, and father to his girls. Those girls, Amy, Hannah, and Louise, built lives anchored right in their hometown. 25-year-old Louise ran a successful dog grooming business from an outbuilding on the family property. 28-year-old Hannah worked locally as a beauty therapist. Amy remained an unwavering support pillar for the whole family. In late 2022, 26-year-old Kyle Clifford entered the picture as Louise's boyfriend. A former soldier who had left the military unemployed, Clifford was welcomed into Sunday roasts and family holiday celebrations. Over time, however, Louise began noticing troubling behavior, flashes of anger, arrogance, and a belittling attitude. On June 26, 2024, Louise made a firm, mature decision to end things. But while the Hunt family viewed the split as a clean break, Clifford viewed it as an insult to his sense of control. Within hours of being turned away, his rejection curdled into calculation, and he opened his phone to begin an 11-day preparation window. Between June 26 and July 9, Clifford assembled his kit, purchasing a 10-inch butcher's knife, a compound crossbow, bolts, duct tape, and petrol online. He researched John Hunt's work schedule and test-fired the crossbow into a tree to ensure lethality. At 2:32 p.m. on July 9, Clifford knocked on Carol Hunt's door under the premise of returning Louise's belongings. Doorbell audio captured Carol welcoming him inside with her usual kindness. Between 6 and 13 minutes later, Clifford killed Carol using the butcher's knife. At 3:10 p.m., Clifford walked back to his car, retrieved his concealed crossbow, and locked himself inside the house, knowing Louise would eventually come inside from her grooming shed. At 4:13 p.m., Louise entered the main house. Clifford ambushed her, bound her with duct tape, and held her captive for over 2 hours. Forensic analysis showed he spent that time searching whether disabling smoke detectors would sound an alarm and texting John Hunt at 5:58 p.m. to confirm he wouldn't be returning early. Before ending Louise's life, Clifford committed a final act of violence, sexually assaulting her while she was restrained. Reconstructing these cases minute by minute using court documents, phone records, and digital forensics takes extensive research. If you value clear, accurate storytelling that breaks down complex investigations without unnecessary drama, hit subscribe and turn on notifications. Your support allows us to continue bringing you well-documented analysis every single week. 2. At 6:51 p.m., 28-year-old Hannah Hunt arrived home from work. Realizing immediately that something was wrong, Hannah managed to text her boyfriend Alex at 6:52 p.m., telling him Clifford was inside and tying people up. Seconds later, Clifford shot Hannah with the compound crossbow and fled the house at 6:55 p.m. Despite her catastrophic injuries, Hannah showed remarkable resilience. She crawled through the house, located her mother's phone, and called 999. On the recording, Hannah gave the emergency dispatcher her exact address, reported that she had been shot, and explicitly named Kyle Clifford as the attacker. Emergency responders arrived by 7:10 p.m. Though paramedics worked tirelessly, Hannah passed away at the scene alongside her mother and sister. A 22-hour nationwide manhunt followed. On July 10, armed police cornered Clifford in Lavender Hill Cemetery in Enfield. As officers closed in, Clifford discharged the crossbow into his own chest. The shot paralyzed him permanently, but did not kill him. He was taken into custody under armed guard to face justice. In January 2025, Kyle Clifford pleaded guilty to 3 counts of murder, false imprisonment, and 2 weapons charges, but denied the rape charge. Prosecutors presented precise forensic timing evidence that completely dismantled his defense, proving the assault occurred during Louise's captivity. The jury deliberated for just 45 minutes before returning a unanimous guilty verdict. On March 11, 2025, Judge Joel Benathan sentenced Clifford to 3 whole life orders, guaranteeing he will die in prison without the possibility of parole. The tragedy also forced immediate systemic change. At the time of the murders, crossbows in the UK required no license, registration, or background check. Citing the Bushey case directly, the British government launched major legislative reforms proposing mandatory licensing, suitability checks, and severe restrictions on crossbow ownership. Rather than letting their loved ones be defined solely by violence, John and Amy Hunt established the Hunt Family Fund, channeling resources towards supporting and empowering young women. Amy Hunt has continuously spoken out against media sensationalism, urging the public to focus on systemic domestic abuse prevention and honor who Carol, Hannah, and Louise were in life. Carol, Louise, and Hannah Hunt left behind a powerful legacy of love and lasting legal reform. We are committed to telling these vital stories with the dignity and thoroughness they deserve. If this analysis resonated with you, please subscribe, like the video, and join the conversation in the comments below. Let us know what case we should cover next. In January 2025, Kyle Clifford stood before a judge and formally pleaded guilty to 3 counts of murder, the false imprisonment of Louise Hunt, and 2 distinct weapons charges tied to the butcher's knife and compound crossbow. But he refused to take full accountability, denying the single count of rape against Louise. His denial forced a separate trial in March 2025, subjecting the surviving members of the Hunt family to the ordeal of a public courtroom examination. During the rape trial, Clifford's defense team attempted to argue that any physical evidence recovered by investigators could be attributed to consensual contact earlier in his 18-month relationship with Louise. Prosecutors dismantled this narrative piece by piece using precise digital forensics and medical timing data. Expert witnesses established that the physical evidence directly aligned with the exact timeline of Louise's multi-hour captivity on July 9, completely excluding any earlier encounter. Showing total disregard for the judicial process, Clifford refused to leave his prison cell or appear via video link for the duration of the rape trial, as well as his subsequent sentencing hearing. Judge Joel Benathan chose not to force a chaotic remote broadcast, ensuring that John and Amy Hunt could deliver their victim impact statements in a dignified courtroom setting. Amy spoke of the profound, irreplaceable void left by the loss of her mother and sisters, while John expressed his enduring gratitude to Carol for the decades of love and family she had cultivated. The jury deliberated for roughly 45 minutes before returning a unanimous guilty verdict on the rape charge. On March 11, 2025, Judge Benathan handed down 3 separate whole life orders, 1 for each murder, alongside concurrent sentences of 20 years for rape, 8 years for false imprisonment, and 1 year each for the weapons offenses. The judge noted unequivocally that Clifford had meticulously planned to execute an entire family, ensuring he will spend the rest of his life in prison without any possibility of parole. Beyond the courtroom, the sheer ruthlessness of the attack exposed a dangerous gap in United Kingdom weapon regulations. At the time Clifford bought his equipment online, compound crossbows were legally classified closer to sporting goods than restricted weapons. Unlike firearms, they required no background checks, no mental health screening, no suitability verification, and no official registration. Anyone over 18 with an internet connection could purchase a high-powered weapon capable of firing lethal broadhead bolts directly to their doorstep. The tragedy on Ashland Close became an undeniable catalyst for national legislative change. Citing the Bushey murders as primary evidence, the UK government initiated comprehensive legal reviews aimed at closing the crossbow loophole once and for all. Proposed measures moved forward to introduce mandatory licensing for all existing owners, strict suitability checks prior to purchase, restrictions on broadhead arrow sales, and an outright ban on unverified online sales. In the wake of unimaginable grief, John and Amy Hunt made a deliberate choice not to let Carol, Hannah, and Louise be reduced to sensationalized headlines or defined solely by the violence that ended their lives. They established the Hunt Family Fund, channeling public support and raising community donations into initiatives that directly help and inspire young women. Amy Hunt actively used her voice to push back against media tropes that label perpetrators with dramatic titles, emphasizing instead the necessity of addressing underlying domestic abuse, misogyny, and how society educates young men about relationships. Carol, Louise, and Hannah Hunt left behind a legacy defined not by a killer's actions, but by the deep love they built and the lasting structural reforms brought about in their memory.